Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another wonderful episode of Speaking of Jazz with the West Michigan Jazz Society. Tonight, we have an incredibly special guest with us, and I know I say that every time, but they really are all special guests. But first, I would like to remind you that we have some special programming coming up starting next week in celebration of Black History Month. Now, as you all know, jazz is Black American music, and we at WMJS are very dedicated to the preservation of said music. So one of the things that we're doing this year to celebrate Black History Month is we have a variety of panel discussions. So not only will you hear from some of our Grand Rapids elders, our jazz musicians, you will also hear from some of the young lions of Grand Rapids, some of the musicians who got their start in Grand Rapids and have since moved on. And then you'll also hear from a very special Women in Jazz panel, which we're all very excited about. So just to give you a little hint at what's on the horizon, tonight, like I said, we have a wonderful guest. Tonight, our guest is Gail Boyd. Gail is the president of Gail W. Boyd PC, an entertainment law firm, and Gail Boyd Artist Management, and a wholly owned company of the law firm. She is a graduate of DePaul University and DePaul University School of Law and was a founding partner in the very first African-American female law firm in New York. Gail has been involved in entertainment law since 1976 and has specialized in jazz, producing more or being a production coordinator for more than 15 CDs from various jazz artists. Gail has a roster of a who's who of today's jazz stars, and her representation includes Lakeisha Benjamin, Don Braden, John Clayton, Clayton Brothers Quintet, the Clayton Hamilton Orchestra, and many, many more. Tonight, we're so grateful that Gail has kind of allowed us to turn the microphone around because she is the manager of all alternative venues for jazz, which hosts a series of exciting jazz talks with musicians from all over the country. Please join me in putting your virtual hands together and welcoming Gail Boyd. Welcome, Gail. Hey, how's it going?
I'm doing fine, and thank you so much for having me.
We are so excited to have you. Thank you so much for being our guest tonight. So if you could get us started a little bit, I'm wondering how you got the idea to enter entertainment law and why specifically focus on jazz? Oops.
I'll probably take up a whole hour. But I will say that my father was a disc jockey in the nightclubs in Chicago. And he played a lot of jazz because back then in the 50s and 60s, record companies would bring albums to the disc jockeys who would then play them. And people in the nightclubs would then come and ask the DJ, oh, who is that? And then they would go out and buy the record. So my mom and father were divorced. So my father, when I was staying with him, he didn't have a lot to talk to me about. So he would always talk to me about jazz because that was his love. And so he told me once when I was 15 about the John Coltrane Quartet. And I left school that day. When I needed a couple of extra hours, I would tell my mother I was staying with my father, and I would tell my father I was going home. So that gave me a little wiggle room. So I went to this jazz club in Chicago, and I told the owner that I wanted to see John Coltrane. And he said, well, how old are you? And I said, 15. And he said, well, you can't come in here by yourself. And I said, I don't want to drink. I just want to see John Coltrane. And he let me come in the club at 8 o'clock that night. And I saw John Coltrane, Elvin Jones, McCoy Tyner, and Jimmy Garrison. And I was hooked. I knew from that moment on that I wanted to be an attorney. And I also knew that I wanted to be an attorney in jazz. And so I did. That's how I got into it.
That's incredible. Like what a history of being with the music. Sorry, I think I might have a little echo, so I'm just kind of gonna try to manage that here. So that is an incredible story. And I think, John Coltrane, I mean, he's one of my favorite saxophonists.
Well, yeah, mine
probably
too.
One of everybody's favorite saxophonists, I think. So when you were growing up, John Coltrane, did you have a facet, like you were hooked then, but who else did you go out and see when you were seeing all these artists in the clubs?
Oh, well, I went to see James Moody, and it was a huge snowstorm in Chicago. And I remember trudging through like almost 2 feet of snow to get to the Pumpkin Room in Chicago to see James Moody. And I got there and he was there and he performed. It was like 8 people in the club, so it was very intimate. I got to see, quite a few of the people in and around Chicago. I saw Miles Davis at the Plug Nickel, which was amazing. And I think Freddie Cole years ago in Chicago. So that was just my thing. And of course, a lot of the jazz musicians who lived in and around Chicago who later became AACM, they were all doing great things in the late 60s, early 70s. And I saw all of them, Henry Threadgill and Air and, all of those people.
Yeah, and Muhal Richard Abrams.
Oh, Richard Abrams, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, some really amazing stuff going on in the scene from Chicago. And, I think in Michigan, we tend to be very Detroit centric. Like I know for myself, we love the city of Detroit. And I know that when I talk to people like Kevin from New York and New Jersey, he's always all about, well, New York City, New York City. Sometimes I think Chicago gets a little bit left behind in terms of it. Well, in terms of like, what the places that we give recognition. How do you think the musicians in Chicago were really taking, I guess, what do you think Chicago contributed in terms of its vibrancy and as a city to that kind of scene?
Well, Chicago is so vibrant. I almost think, although there's tons and tons of jazz, it also became very well known as a blues town. But, Johnny Griffin came from Chicago. You had, I'm trying to think of his last name now. His brother was George, and they had a jam session that would go on. But you had a lot of people coming in and through Chicago, all of a sudden my brain just went to sleep. But I'll think of it as we talk. I'll think of the ones that I'm trying to think of now.
That's right.
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no worries at all. So for those of us who in the audience who might be a little bit unfamiliar, so your firm, Gail Boyd Artist Management, what does an artist management firm do for artists? What are they? How do you work with artists?
So I like to say that an artist manager tries to take care of all of the business for a musician so the musician can concentrate on his or her art. And so there are 4 sort of key areas that I think the artist manager can help take care of for the artist. One is recording, of course, whether you are recording for yourself or if you were with a label. The manager is the one who would get someone to negotiate that deal for you, or in my instance, since I'm a lawyer, I often negotiate those deals for my client. Another is the marketing of that product, and that is working with people to make sure you have radio promotion and you have social media marketing going and things like that. Another is booking. And so while a manager does not necessarily book the artist, in fact, there are some states where it's illegal to book an artist if you are managing that artist. You need to find a booking agent, both domestic and international, and put together a team that can tour the artist domestically and internationally. And so those are sort of the spokes, recording, PR, marketing, and those are the primary spokes. Everything kind of comes from that.
Very cool. And so you have worked with so many wonderful artists, a real who's who in the jazz scene. How did you get to know some of these individuals?
Well, I started out as an entertainment lawyer.
Okay.
And so clients would come to me to negotiate their record deals. And it dawned on me after a while that that wasn't where the fun was. Like I would
Mhm.
negotiate the contract, and then the artist would take the contract and do what I call go off and have all the fun. And I was Betty Carter's lawyer. And I remember telling her one day, where are you all going now that I've negotiated this contract? And she said, oh, well, we're going up to Boston. We're going to put together this concert with David Amram at the Boston Pops, and we're going to do this. And I thought, well, that's what I want to do. And she said, well, Gail, that's management. That's not law. And I was like, duh, okay, then that's what that's what I want to do. And so I started, I was still practicing law, but then I started dipping my toe a little bit into the world of management and found that I love it. It does not pay as much as being a lawyer, but I'm certainly a lot happier doing it.
I think happiness has its own reward. Like happiness in and of itself is its own commodity.
Yes.
And I think it's so highly valued and so beautiful that you have found, your way to that fun place. I want to talk about you were a founding partner. That's the language I was looking for.
Yeah.
A founding partner of the first African-American female law firm in New York. Can you talk about what that was like and how it kind of changed the landscape of law at that point?
We really didn't set out to make that kind of history. I was working for I was working for the New York City Department of Human Rights, and so was my future partner. And she had a friend who was working for legal services. And we were all, we would get together in the evenings and we would talk about being, wanting to do something different. And so finally we said, well, why don't we start a law firm? And we said, okay, that sounds good. And we started practice with just 3 friends. But the American Bar Association wrote to us and said, we'd like to come out and do an interview of you because we think that you all are the only all-female Black law firm in New York. And so we did. We let them come out and they interviewed us. And then it turns out that the ABA wrote to us later and said, we actually think you're the first African-American female law firm in the country. We couldn't find any others. That was in 1985.
Wow. It's interesting how when, you can go out there and accomplish something, but not even plan on accomplishing it. Like, for example, I don't think Herbie Hancock went out and said, you know what, I'm going to cut a record with Miles Davis.
Right.
And I don't think he ever thought about, well, I could be wrong, but I don't think he ever thought about that. It's really interesting to me that sometimes, when you have this inclination to make work of something, that, it really did end up setting such a kind of a standard and a precedent. So so how long did you practice with that firm?
So we started our practice in 1985. And by 1995, one of the partners, one of the founding partners, Betty Staton, got elected to go on to the bench as a family court judge. I had been dipping my toe by that time in artist management. I literally started in like 91. I was still practicing law, but I was also doing some management. And so I just said to the remaining partner, I think I want to do this full time. And she said, well, I think I want to do some consulting with healthcare because she came from a family of doctors. So we all kind of parted friendly and we're still friends to this day, but it was a little about 10 years.
Wow, that's really great to hear that you all parted on good terms. I know that it's pretty often that it just doesn't happen that way, and so it's beautiful to hear that that happened for you. Now, as I said, we do have some questions that come in, and we already had one, so I'm gonna play that across the screen here. So Jake asks, if you had one recommendation for someone earlier in their work on the business side of music, what would it be? And I will give some context to this question.
Okay.
Jake is actually a young manager of a band here in Grand Rapids called In the Blue. So he's went asking for that personal experience there.
So when you're starting out, I think it's really, first of all, whatever the area of music that you're interested in, it's really important that you know all that you can about that genre of music. I started out really early because I came up through jazz. But if you're interested in jazz, for example, and I'll use that as an example because it's me, I spent a great deal of time learning who's who, what the lineage is, what those people had to go through. Because if you don't understand the music and the struggles of the musicians and the people who make the music, it's kind of hard to figure out how to help them. So I know a lot of people start out by saying, oh, well, you should get a book on contracts and you should get a book on labor law, and all those things are helpful. But I think it's more important to have a sense for what the artist needs. I always say that the artist has to tell me where they're going. I might be the one driving the car, but they have to tell me what they want to do with their lives, because then it's my job to help them get there. The only way I can do that is to really know what artists need, and in my case, what jazz artists need. And so now I have a really good working knowledge of the jazz industry. Now I'm able to talk about how I can help. So I think whatever the genre is, know as much about it as possible. Don't leave that to chance. Because if an artist comes to me, if a jazz artist comes to me for management, and they ask me, well, what should I do for my next album? My answer always is, I have absolutely no idea. That's not my job. Your job is to come to me and say, Gail, here's what I'd like to do for my next album. Do you think that will work? How could we sell that? Where could I tour that? That's my job. But to try to tell a person who is a musician what they should do with their art, I think is unfair for any manager to do. Although I do know some managers who do that, who try to take over for what the artist is doing. And I don't actually operate that way. I operate quite the opposite. So I say, know the genre, know your craft, look at other managers, try to see if you can be an intern with one, and or just a mentor, someone to whom you can ask questions when you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another thing here, a comment that came in that I'm going to kind of turn around into a question. So we've got Tim here who said, you mentioned Betty Carter. She was also an excellent businesswoman besides being a great vocalist. Can you speak to that a little bit based on your relationship with Betty?
She was one of the best business people that I still know. She knew, and that was what I was saying earlier. She knew exactly what she wanted. She knew exactly where she wanted to end up in any given time. And I started with her. I was probably out of law school only a couple of years when I started with her. And so she would say to me, and I still say, I've been in this business now for a very long time, managing for 30 years. But she would say to me when I was starting out, here is where I want to end up. I don't know how to do it from a legal standpoint, but I know where I want to end up. It's up to you to figure out how to get me there. And so that was sort of some of the best lessons that I could. But, you know, she had Betcar Records. She had her own label. And she did it for a long time. And when I first started working with her, I spent many a day in her spare bedroom packaging up LPs to mail to record companies, I mean, to record stores, remember those. And so she was a really good business person. And I still say about 60% of what I know, I probably learned through Betty.
That's really incredible. And, you know, I think that I guess the nature of so much of this work, and also on the music side and the business side, we just learn so much from experiencing it.
Yeah, that's almost that's actually the only way. I mean, you can learn in a book. You know, there's this Business of Music and other books that people can buy and get an idea, but you really don't know until you actually get somebody to trust you enough to put their lives in your hand. I never take that for granted. When an artist comes to me for management, I never take for granted that they have literally taken their artistic life and sort of handed it to me and said, here, help me fulfill my dreams. And so I'm very serious about trying to do that. It doesn't often work, but I'm very serious about it. When I can help someone, I will.
That's a really beautiful sentiment. And I think it goes to show you that, you're really a very person first type of manager, in the sense that you're really looking to care for others and do what you can for them. And I think that's such a, well, in a world where the industry of music has gone increasingly in the way of commercialization and a certain commodification of musicians, I think it really is, it's refreshing. It's a breath of fresh air to hear you say that. And I think that it's where we need to go back to.
Well, it's almost the only way for me that it actually really works. And that is, I am there to fulfill what the artist needs. And I'm not there to tell the artist what to do. So I really do think that that's the most important thing that I can do. And it's very much, other than an actual marriage between two people, manager and client relationship, personal management in this music industry is as close as you can get to that. And by that, I mean that you won't always see everything eye to eye. There are days when the artist will want to do something and you absolutely know that that's not the direction for whatever reason, and the artist will have said to you, but this is what I want. And then you go out and you try to do it and you come back. Now you're not seeing eye to eye because you said, look, I went and tried to do this and it didn't work. Let's retool or retune. And at that point, it's like a marriage in that you don't cut and run. You know that you're in it for the long haul. And so you just have to keep looking out the window and saying, we're in this for the long haul. And then you retool together and you come up with another strategy. As a manager, I can come up with a strategy and then I have to see if I can sell it to the artist, because after all, I work for the artist, not the other way around.
Wise words. So I just want to issue a few reminders. First of all, we're here with artist manager Gail Boyd, and I want to remind you that Speaking of Jazz is provided free of charge by the West Michigan Jazz Society, and to donate if you can to help support our mission. And then lastly, and most importantly, remember, your questions and your comments make this more fun for everybody. So feel free to comment with questions for our guest, and we will do our best to answer them. So I want to talk about alternative venues for jazz. Now, obviously, the pandemic was devastating to everybody, but I think it took a special toll on musicians and on communities of color. And so I'm wondering if you could talk to how you brought alternative venues for jazz and you brought the Jazz Talks to life.
Sure. I started Alternative Venues for Jazz in 2017. I had been asked to moderate a panel for the Jazz Congress with the same title, Alternative Venues for Jazz. And that came about because I had read an article that the average salary of jazz musicians was less than, I don't know if it's average, it might be the median salary of jazz musicians was less than $20,000 a year. And I thought, okay, that's kind of criminal because nobody can live like that. They can't support a family. They can't fulfill their dreams. So what can we do? We need alternative venues. Everybody can't work at the jazz clubs and the jazz festivals. We need to have a place where we can talk about other places where musicians could work. So that's how it started. And so from January 2017 until April 2020, that's what it was. And if a musician would come on and try to pitch where they were going to be working, I would instantly take them off because I'd say, that's not what this site is for. This site is for conversation, just to say, hey, I found a gig over here at this church, or I found a gig on this cruise ship, or things like that. So when the pandemic hit in March, my income went from a fairly decent 2020 to having every single date on every one of my clients canceled. So I started thinking, if that's happening to me and my clients, that's happening worldwide. I mean, it didn't take a genius to figure that out, but it did take me a few minutes. So I said, okay, if nobody's working, this is the alternative venue for jazz, my site. So I took away all the restrictions and I said to people, now you can post. If you have a streaming, if you have a pre-recorded concert, if you are just getting on and playing from your bedroom, put it on here because we need to support each other. So I did that from March to April. And then I threw out just a query on the Facebook page and said, is there anybody who wants to come on and just talk about themselves for 30 minutes? And I thought maybe I would do like one a month and that would be it. Well, I put that out and I got like 40 something replies right away. So I thought, okay, if I do one a month, that'll be 4 years. So I need to do something else. So I decided that I would do it once a day. So Monday through Friday at 5 o'clock on Facebook, you can go to Alternative Venues for Jazz and you will hear somebody talking about their story, telling their story. And I always tell them, I want you to tell the kinds of stories that you wanted interviewers to ask you and they never did. So this is your 30 minutes to just talk about what you're doing, who your mentors were, what did they teach you, what would you say to younger people, how did you get into jazz, things like that. And so I don't curate it in that I'm not looking for just the big names. If you want to come on, if you are a jazz musician, and you want to come on and tell your story, you just simply send me a Facebook Messenger and say that you want to come on and I will find space for you. At the same time, I have a lot of friends in the industry, and now I'm getting some of them coming on saying, hey, I'd like to do one. So just this past Friday, I had Dee Dee Bridgewater. I've known Dee Dee for 30 years at least. She did one, and Charles McPherson did one. And, you know, it just goes on and on. Nina Freelon and Diane Reeves. And, you know, it's been great. But I also still will have people who are working just in their small town and they're jazz musicians, and they will come on and do their half hour. And I don't try to curate it at all.
That's really amazing. And, you know, a really great example, I think, of something that our industry, and particularly the jazz art form, is really good at, which is pivoting and being flexible. One might even say improvising, right? So I think that's a really cool thing. Well, Martine just expressing some love for the show, saying
I love Martine. Hi, Martine.
Yeah, I know. She said you had some great guests on. Dee Dee Bridgewater was fantastic. I happen to be a Martine fan too. So, so who were your mentors? Who encouraged you on your path? Because I think, you know, in terms of jazz culture, it's a culture of community and a culture of mentorship. And so I really think that it's so important. So who are some of your mentors that you had coming up?
So in terms of law, I would say that Jewel LaFontant she wasn't a mentor, but she was an idol. I never got to meet her. I grew up very poor in Chicago, and she was already an attorney. But I remember that I didn't know any Black female attorneys, but I knew that I wanted to be one. And one day I saw her picture in the paper. And so I remember cutting it out and sort of putting it in my room saying, I'm going to be like her. And literally when I finished law school and I was practicing in Chicago, I got a chance to meet her and told her that she had been my quiet mentor all those years, because I looked up to her and knew that it was possible for me to be an attorney. So as a lawyer, she is one. As a manager, I would have to say that it would be Betty Carter, because she taught me so much about this business. She's probably my primary mentor in that. And my father, who started all of this mess by showing me his record collection and quizzing me. Sometimes he would say, who's this on trumpet? And I'd say Blue Mitchell, and he'd say, wrong, that's Fats Navarro. And we'd argue back and forth. And I mean, now I realize how much fun that was. Sometimes being quizzed when you're 8 and 9 is not so great. It's
like you guys were doing that downbeat, drop the needle kind of test thing that
Exactly.
they do on the magazine. You were the trendsetter there, it sounds like.
My father was, for sure.
So, did you come from a musical family? You did mention that your father had a pretty extensive record collection, but was anybody in your family involved in the music directly?
No. My father was, as I said, he was a DJ in the clubs. Back in the 50s, you had to get your own sponsors if you were going to be on radio. And so almost all the people who were like him, who did DJing in the clubs, quite a few of them ended up getting their own radio shows. My father never did do that. He continued to just do it in the clubs. But I can't hold a tune in a bucket. I have absolutely no musical, and that's why I'm so in awe of the creative process, actually, because it's something that I know is a gift, and it's a gift that not everybody has. And anything that you can do to kind of protect people who have that gift, I think that's my calling.
Wow, so inspiring. So you've been, obviously, and we've gone over this like a couple times, you've been involved in the music industry, specifically in the genre of jazz, for quite some time, and you've got so much experience with the music. What is something that you've seen change significantly? And I'm not going to ask for the most significant change, because I'm sure you could list like 20 or 200. But what is the most significant, or I just asked that, what is a change that you've seen in your time as a manager?
So in my time as a manager, it was at one point, I remember when the music industry kind of went from LPs to CDs, there were a lot of young jazz musicians who were getting signed to major labels and getting things like signing bonuses. I had one client back then that got a $50,000 signing bonus, and that doesn't happen at all anymore. I remember representing another artist way back in the 90s who got a 27-city tour support from the record company. That doesn't happen anymore. Record companies now are not really giving great deals. A lot of jazz musicians are having to finance their own recordings. I actually prefer that, because I think artists need to own their own masters. The biggest change, I think, is streaming. If you sell one CD, that is about the same amount of money that you will earn if you own your own master as you would if you had 200 streams. The streaming is the money that you can get as an artist is so low that it's just not worth it anymore. And I think that we learned a big lesson in this pandemic. We got to the point where record companies would give us very little money. We would put a record out. We would pay, after we would get very little money, we would have to then pay the record companies for the CDs that we would then go out on the road and sell. And we kind of got used to that as a business model, where the record companies made their money on streaming, because many of the majors own part of the streaming services. So they don't really care anymore if you sell, because they're making their money just on plays. So we kind of got used in this market to taking CDs out on the road with us and selling the CDs while we perform. Well, the pandemic taught us that probably wasn't the best working model, because now everybody is sitting there with tons of CDs sitting in their living rooms and in their bedrooms, not able to sell them in the same manner in which we could when we were touring. And so we have to think about a new business model, and we have to make sure that if we are streaming, we are getting part of the income. That I really encourage people to try as best they can not to just stream for free with a tip bucket. You don't want to cheapen your brand, is what I call it. So you want to do things that can keep the artistic juices flowing on the one hand, but save yourself a little bit for when the world does come back, because the world will come back. And then you don't want anybody to say, well, I gave you $5 as a tip bucket and I heard a whole concert, so now why should I pay you X number of $1,000? I can just go back because I saved that, so I can go back and listen to that. So now we have to think about different and new ways for artists to monetize themselves. And that's what I'm busy literally doing, is thinking about licensing and how do we do these pre-recorded concerts and then sell them, or sell them to more than one venue and have it go out to 5 venues, and how do we get more money that way. Those are the kinds of things I'm working on. That's what keeps me up at night.
Yeah, I think, you know, with labels especially, I see a lot of people self-releasing and really depending a lot on a publicist, on an artist manager to really get the music out there. Because, you know, a lot of those labels just aren't doing that really anymore. And to me, it used to kind of make me a little bit sad, because I thought this is a change in the industry, and you know, you really listen to like the halcyon days of people saying like, oh, the $50,000 signing bonus, like, or the label supporting, you know, a $27,000 tour. But I mean, that's the reality right now. And for artists, you know, we can't live in the days of the past. We have to be in tune with reality,
Right.
And to function in that reality. So I think it's great when people like you are going out there and saying, well, let's figure out how we do this.
Yeah, we don't want to go back. I've heard too many people say, let's go back to the old days. And we don't want to go back. That wasn't fair for artists. It was fair if you were a record company owning the master. But I think we have to spend this time rethinking almost everything that we've done and figuring out a way to monetize it. And it certainly is a way. I've got far more questions than I do answers right now, but I know that we have to think about, when we come out of this, how do we structure ourselves so that we are beneficiaries of more of our creative input? That's, as I say, that's keeping me up at night.
Well, we got another question in here from Jake, and he says, especially after this year, what do you think needs to happen next in the jazz industry for the music? By this, I mean, how can the industry support artists to live their dreams?
Jake's coming up with good questions.
I know, yeah, we can depend on Jake, I guess.
Well, one of the things that is keeping me up at night that I'm thinking about, and I haven't thought it through completely, and so it might sound a little incomplete, but you all are all probably too young to remember what people used to call the Chitlin Circuit. And the Chitlin Circuit was a series of venues that artists could go around and play. A lot of them were primarily in the South, and they didn't make a lot of money, but because they could go to so many, they could be out on the road 2, 3, 4 months if they wanted to. I want to have a modern day Chitlin Circuit, but I'll call it the vegetarian circuit since I don't eat meat. But I'm thinking of trying to pull together, with alternative venues for jazz, a list of venues that we could create a circuit where musicians could work, you know, 4 or 5 nights a week, have 2 nights off, but just be on a bus or whatever it is, and just go from one end of this country to the other, working, something like that. I know it was done in Europe, and it was done very successfully by an agent that I know, and he called it the Rising Stars Tour. And he basically, for 2.5 weeks, musicians would go around different clubs in Europe, and he would pay a set amount of money. So you would come away, the leader would get one amount, the sideman would get another amount. It was a pretty decent fee at that point. And then when you finish that route, then another set of musicians would come in. I want to create something like that.
That sounds really cool. Like the idea of going, you know, and using venues in different areas of the country. Well, I think you should definitely have a couple stops in Michigan, because we've got,
oh, for sure.
We've got Cliff Bell's, we've got the Dirty Dog, we've
Right.
got a new club in Grand Rapids, GR Noir,
Okay.
Wine and Jazz, and so we are Michigan is I won't say it's the most happening, because I mean, I think Kevin would give me some trouble for that just because he'd say, no, it's all about New York, New Jersey.
Not anymore. That's just it. Not anymore. And I don't think it should go back. I mean, since we're in our little bubbles, I think there's going to be Michigan music that comes out. That's going to sound very differently than New York music. It's going to sound very different than California music, at Southern California, and very different than Northern California. And, you know, I tell people, because someone said this in a panel that I was on not too long ago, that when they had the plague in the Middle Ages, that right after that was the Renaissance. So you can concentrate on the plague, but you can also think about the Renaissance and all the creative output that came from that. And then when they had the Spanish flu in 1918 and 1919, what happened after that? The Roaring Twenties and the Harlem Renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
It was an amazing amount of creative output. And so I kind of think that that's what we need to think about, and not go back to the way things were. But since we're all sitting at home kind of stewing in our juices and thinking about what we want to do, let's come out of this thinking a whole new way. And that's what I'm looking forward to.
I love that. Such a positive way to think about the current situation. And I think, as difficult as it can be to think that way, I think it's something that we have to do, because if we don't think in that way, all of a sudden I feel like things are going to open back up and we're not going to have anything to show.
We won't be ready. Yeah, we
can't
stew in our juices. We can't be like, oh me, what are we going to do? You have to say, I can't work. I'm not making any money. In March of 2020, I lost all of my income, like every dime. And I had spent January and February getting the year ready. So I hadn't made any money at all in January and February. So March 2020, I lost every dime. And those dates have now been pushed to March of 2022. So that means I've got to figure out how to live for 2 years with no money coming in. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And not only that, I'm going to come out swinging, because I've got 2 years to figure out how to make some money. So if I can just hold on, and that's what I'm saying to all my clients, and they're finding, you know, creative ways of trying to hold on. But if we can all hold on, we're going to come out of this better than when we went in. If we have to stay healthy, that's the main thing. We have to stay healthy. We have to wear our masks. We have to social distance. We have to wash our hands. We have to get vaccinated. All of that. But assuming that you've done all that, then you got to figure out, how do you live? How do you pay your rent? How do you just eat? How do you live? But once you've done that, spend all the rest of your time trying to figure out what you're going to do when you come out from under this.
You know, something you said about being in our bubbles, and you know, you're saying that, yeah, there's a North California jazz and a South California music, and you know, Michigan. The thing that's really interesting is, you know, people say very often that history repeats itself. And I just think about how the music started, because information was traveling at a much slower pace than it does now. So, you know, New Orleans music went to Chicago during the Great Migration, and it's really interesting to see that, you know, we started with a very regional art form, or perhaps like regional subsets of the same art form. And now what you're saying, which I think makes a lot of sense, is that people are you know, they're thinking in these different ways, but regionally, you think things are going to start to pop up. That's very interesting to me in from a historical standpoint.
Sure. I mean, Kansas City has a completely different sound.
That's right.
And Chicago had a different sound than Detroit in terms of jazz and the creative output. So that's what I want to see happen again, because people are not traveling. So they're in their cocoons and they're playing with each other. And I think something good is going to come out of that.
Well, I think it has to. I mean, we just, but you're just so. I keep going back to this comment that you said. You know, after the flu epidemic of the late 1910s, you know, the Harlem Renaissance, the Roaring Twenties, that kind of creativity after the plague in the in
Middle Ages.
Europe. In the Middle Ages,
Then
Then
you
you
have
have
the
the
Renaissance.
Renaissance.
So whenever you see a bunch of creative people who can't do their art, something bubbles up, I think. And then when it's over, if it's over and we go back to the way things were, we've wasted this time.
Yeah.
And there's no need in us doing that.
Absolutely. So when you do think that we are coming out of this, right, with a better and we're going to come out swinging, what do you think that looks like for artists? What do you think that looks like for artist managers? Like, what do you think that looks like in terms of just the, we want it to be different from what we experienced before, but what specifically, what are we looking for, and what are you thinking that we might experience differently?
Ownership, exercising your agency to create your work and keep it and own it and sell it yourself in a way, creating a different and new market. Even if you're working with a label, trying to make that more fair. But that's what I see, just the whole notion of self-determination, deciding for yourself what it is you need to do and putting your team around you to get it done. Because if you don't imagine it, if you can't think of it, and if you can't see yourself in that new environment, you certainly can't get there. You have to see yourself. I always tell my clients, like I do a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year test with them. And I say, wiggle your nose, close your eyes, and then write to me what you are doing a year from now. But don't write it like I wish, I hope, I want to. Write it as though you're already doing it. So say, I am Jordan, and next year this time, I am working here, I am doing that, I have done an album, I have worked here, whatever it is you want to see, write it as though you are actually doing it. Because in my philosophy, if you do that, it cannot not happen. Because you put it in the universe. You've already said, I'm Jordan, and this is what I'm doing next year. But I ask my clients to do that for a year, for 3 years, and 5 years. Because if in 5 years you say you want to perhaps perform at Carnegie Hall, but in the first year you say you want to just, go on vacation and not practice, I'm going to say there's something that's not working.
Yeah.
You have to look at, if you want to be in Carnegie Hall in 5 years, you have to say what it is you're doing like now. And I do that with myself, and I encourage everybody, not just my clients, I encourage everybody to not say, I wish, I hope. If you hope for something, if you wish for it, you are allowing the possibility that it won't happen. But if you say, this is what I am doing this next year. I see myself walking out of my new apartment. Here are the keys. I see myself walking into this place that I want to work. I see myself earning. I am actually putting this check in the bank. It sounds wishy-washy. It sounds, like a little woo-hoo, but actually, and it might be. But the whole point is it keeps you a little more motivated than if you keep saying, I hope things will be different in a year. I sure hope I can get this job. I mean, really, I think it's about a mindset, a positive mindset that you have to have. And it also keeps you encouraged. It's like this, it's like you're sort of revving up your own engine every time you say that. So those are kind of my mantras. I wake up in the morning and I start saying what I'm going to be doing. That's what I said. Right now, I have more questions than I have answers, but that's what I do. I go to bed with all those questions, and then I'm trying to answer them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, just to go along with that, Martine says you have to claim it.
Absolutely.
And absolutely. And I mean, that's it right there. That's it. And I think, I think there are a lot of people who might not see, because, musicians, some of us are more self-aware than others, creative individuals. Some of us are more self-aware than others. And so if you're saying, yeah, cool, I want to play Birdland 3 years. And then you say, all right, I'm going to go on vacation this year and not practice an instrument. Some of them are more than, some of us are more aware than others. And so I think by putting it in writing like that,
Yes.
man, it sure helps you notice, like, where things might not be lining up with your
Right.
between what you're hoping
That's right.
and what you are actually doing. And that, I think that I always heard somebody say, what are you doing today?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
what are you doing today to make that happen? And so, like, I'll talk to my students a lot, and they'll say, yeah, so, I'm really, I would love to go here, or, you know, really work on some of my original compositions. And what are you doing today to
Yeah.
do that? What are you doing today? Are you spending some time at the piano? Are you spending some time, working on your craft? Are you putting anything on the manuscript paper?
That's
And
right.
if the answer is no, then, I think it's a lot of what we do today. And sometimes, those big goals, right? Those big goals, I just think sometimes we forget that it's one step.
That's
That's
right.
the first step. Just one
And you
step
have to
forward.
see yourself. You have to see yourself actually achieving what it is you have claimed.
Mhm.
Does everybody get there? No. But you certainly won't get there if you don't do that.
Definitely.
Some people will luck their way into anything,
Mhm.
and sometimes luck will get you in the door. It may not keep you there, but if you claim it and if you are moving toward it, you can't just claim it. You also have to work toward it.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So if you do both those things, it will get you closer. That's for sure. I mean, I grew up, as I said earlier, I grew up very poor in Chicago in public housing with a single mother who had no she didn't finish high school, so she didn't go to college, and there was nobody really in my family, in my immediate family, who had. And yet, at 8 years old, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer.
Mhm.
If you had asked me how I was going to do that, I would not have had any idea at all. But I always knew I would.
Mhm.
And so I'm kind of a believer in that because I did.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying? And it wasn't a
that's right.
straight path. Often things aren't straight paths. But if you don't claim it and if you don't really know that you can get there, you certainly won't.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, once again, we've got the incredible Gail Boyd here, the inspiring Gail Boyd, and I'm just going to throw it out here. If you all have any questions for our guests, feel free to ask them. Feel free to drop them in the comments. Particularly, I'm interested if there are any musicians out there. This is your chance to ask somebody who has a lot of experience in artist management. I mean, she's a pretty open book. So why don't, I invite you to go ahead and liven up that comment section for us. Yeah, and I think there's just so much that we have to learn from this time that we're in right now. And if you don't view it as a learning opportunity, then that's a good recipe for getting stuck.
Absolutely.
Like that's a good recipe to go nowhere fast.
I learned that I don't need shoes. I haven't been out. I mean, I go outside, but I just wear my sneakers. So I have all these shoes, and I've just learned that I have way more shoes than I'll ever need. And there are things in our life like that, that if nothing else, we should be learning that about ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've learned a similar lesson about shoes. I don't have a ton of pairs, but it's really interesting how in the waning months of last year, how underutilized some of them were.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think so. So again, you've been around some really great artists,
Yes.
and some like kind of a who's who, like I said. And I have some students who I'm pretty sure maybe they're watching, but maybe they're just a little shy or something. I'm wondering what you would say to a student of music from being around all of these incredible artists. Like, what are some of the habits of highly successful artists that, like the ones that you're managing?
Practice, practice, practice. Know the lineage of your instrument. Um, find them. You know, I'm always so surprised at how giving older musicians are when younger musicians come to them and ask a question. And I've heard so many people say, young bass players say, "Oh, I went to see Ron Carter, but I didn't want to ask him anything because, you know, he was Ron Carter." And Ron Carter will come home and say sometimes, "Yeah, I saw a bunch of students. Nobody came up to me and said anything." So I think you have to be bold and you have to walk up and say whatever the person is that you have gone to see. You know your lineage. Ask them questions, ask them to mentor you, but also find your voice and keep it. You have something very special to say. And don't try to copy the mentors. Use them as guides, but find your voice. Find whatever it is that made you want to be an artist, and then just practice that. And then take advice from your mentors. And, you know, don't just hang out with people your own age. I always say at my age, I'm 73 years old. I always say to people that I have mentors who are older, but I also have mentors who are younger. And if you are over the age of 45 and you don't have a younger mentor, you're missing out on what's going on. I thought TikTok was still a clock. And if I didn't have a younger mentor telling me what TikTok was, I would be completely in the dark. So that's what I mean. Find an older mentor, find a younger one, so that you can be as knowledgeable as possible about what it is you're trying to do.
My students teach me so much. They teach, and they're my younger mentors.
That's right.
And so when they walk into my studio or my classroom and they say, "Oh, hey, you know," I'll ask them what they're listening to, and they've gotten to the point where they can say, they call me. Some of them call me Doc, and so they'll say, "Hey, Doc, listen to this. Hey, Doc, check this out," and I will always check it out because I never know what I'm missing.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, they're my young mentors.
You got to have both, older and younger.
That's right. So we have a question from Tim here. Should a working musician performing locally seek out management for advice? And I'm assuming what he means is management for advice on kind of widening your net there. It's just a guess.
Not yet. I mean, if you're not, let me say the 5 things that I look at before I decide if I want to work with an artist, and I have boiled it down to price. The P is performing. So is the artist performing anywhere? It doesn't have to be that you're at the Detroit Jazz Festival only, or some of the clubs that you just named in Ann Arbor, but just, are you performing? Are you recording? Are you keeping a record of what it is you're doing? It doesn't have to be a record from a record company. It could be something that you're putting out in your basement. It could be not putting out to sell, but just making sure that you are recording your journey in a way. I want to see what that journey is. So it's P, then R, the I. Are you innovating? I love John Coltrane. If you play John Coltrane softly as in a morning sunrise, that doesn't help me because I've got that record. I can go and hear John Coltrane. But did you do something with the music different? Did you arrange it with different instruments? Did you do a hip hop version of Central Park West? Or what did you do that shows that you are an innovator, that you are thinking and speaking from your own voice? So that's the I. The C is, are you composing? It's important that you not just arrange other people's music. I think it's important that you compose some of your own music. You can be a composer or a great one, it doesn't matter, but you should try your hand at writing and composing, because I think it gets all the sides of the brain working sort of at the same time. So that's the C. And the E, are you educating? Because I am firmly committed to jazz. And the only way that I think it can exist is if you are willing to teach others what it is you're doing. So that's the price. PRICE, performing, recording, innovating, composing, and educating.
Amazing. And that right there, that's experience, that you're able to take price and put it, you know, just put that out there and say that, all right, this is my criteria.
Yes.
I think that's a really incredible thing and a great answer to Tim's question.
Thank you.
We got, this is Alon, student musician, recent graduate of the University of Michigan. And he just says, thank you, Ms. Boyd.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And I'd like to echo that. Thank you so much, Gail, for being with us on the program tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for blessing us with your wisdom, your experience. I've gained a lot. I've learned a lot from this. I know all of our audience has gained a lot from this. And I just think, thank you so much for your generosity, for your for the wonderful stories, and for your incredibly positive spirit. I think if there's somebody who walks away from tonight not being inspired at what is to come, I think they weren't paying attention. So thank you so much, Gail, for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a joy of mine to share. And I really appreciate you giving me this honor.
All right, everybody, that's our show for tonight. Remember, go check out Alternative Venues for Jazz for Gail Boyd's series of jazz talks. And join us next week on the, actually, we do have one more question that I'm going to honor, because this is Martine. So Martine says, can you give us a sneak peek of who will be on the upcoming jazz talks?
Okay, let's see, sneak peek. So tomorrow I have Claire Daly. She's a baritone saxophonist. Where am I? I have Henry Wong, who's the owner of Andi Musique, a club in Baltimore. I have Rosanna Vitro, Carmen Lundy, Jana Herzen, who owns Motema Records, Rhiannon, Neil Sapper, Tamir Hendelman, Paul Carr, Michelle Rosewoman, Rio Sakari, who owns the Jazz Gallery in New York. Roy Haynes' son, Craig Holiday Haynes, is coming on. Gretchen Parlato is coming. Clifton Anderson, who is Sonny Rollins' nephew, but also a really great trombonist. On and on. Peter Eldridge, Billy Childs.
Wow. Wow, that's terrific. And I don't know if that question was there. We have. I just will say our Speaking of Jazz series. Remember, join us next week for the start of our Black History Month celebration. We will be talking with some of the elders of Grand Rapids. And so when Gail's talking about knowing the lineage of the music, that's our lineage here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And if you remember, the Grand Rapids lineage goes all of the West Michigan Jazz Society goes all the way back to Jimmy Forrest. And so we will be honoring that lineage next week, and honoring that lineage all month in February for celebrating Black History Month, celebrating this great Black American music. So thank you again, Gail. Everybody have a great night. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.